is a land of unparalleled beauty, whose strength is of the earth itself. A land of four horizons stretching to boundless time and space. From earliest ages, life in the scattered cities of Greece and in the whitewashed fishing villages dotting her seacoast has moved slowly against the backdrop of majestic mountain ranges, within whose shadowed valleys man has lived from time immemorial and left splendid monuments to his passing. Among the oldest remains of recorded history on the Greek mainland is the mighty citadel of Mycenae, dominating the Argive plain. This was the seat of the Homeric chieftains 30 centuries ago. These same lions listened indifferently as Agamemnon and his princely followers thundered forth to storm the walls of Troy. Early graves within the great walls have yielded priceless treasures of a fabled dynasty. Golden cups, masks, and inlaid weapons of the lords of Mycenae, rich in gold. Later burials took place in beehive tombs, of which the largest is the so-called treasury of Atrus. A carefully constructed passageway leads to the lofty portal of the spacious circular tomb. Due south of Mycenae lies Tíryns, another Homeric fastness. So astounded the ancient world by its that the Cyclopean giants were credited with the erection of the massive wall, behind whose ramparts covered galleries and casement slits formed an elaborate defense system. To a later period of Greek history belongs the famous temple of Poseidon at Sunion. From the time of its construction under Pericles to the present day, this shrine to the sea god of ancient Greece has drawn travelers from all lands, many of whom, like Lord Byron, have left defacing records of their pilgrimage. The Doric columns of Sunion's temple have been a hallowed landmark throughout the ages. To mariners of old, rounding the treacherous tip of the Attic promontory, they were the symbols of perils overcome, the promise of peaceful home waters just ahead. To the visitor today, these soaring pillars are imperishable symbols of art triumphant over the ravages of the centuries. In the shadow of these monuments and glorious past, the people of rural Greece follow a way of life still cast in the primitive pattern of their forefathers. Washing is done in the open air. The household well supplies the water to be heated over an outdoor fire. The tub is a crude stone trough, often an antiquity salvaged from a nearby ancient settlement. Greece is largely a farming land, and every acre of arable ground is cultivated with back-breaking toil. At noonday, the heat of the sun compels the field workers to seek shelter around their treehouse. Here the whole family gathers to relax over a simple midday meal and to enjoy a few hours of siesta. The fruit of months of labor is harvested and sent on its way to the city markets. From the days of Penelope, the women of Greece have spun their wool in the doorways and courtyards of their homes as they gossiped with their neighbors. Ancient, too, is the process of mazitma, preparing the cotton threads for the loom. Nimble fingers separate the threads, straighten them, and slowly twist them around the loom roller. From these threads will come woven napkins and cloths to be embroidered in beautiful native patterns. Across this pleasant land, the past years have thrown dark shadows of alarm, grief, and suffering to more age-old traditions of peace and simple dignity. Even the remote valleys of pastoral Greece felt war's tragic impact. Many a Greek farmer will never return to his land. His orphaned son must tend the few flocks and animals spared by the invader. In the wake of retreating armies, communication arteries like the Corinth Canal were shattered. And in every Greek town and village, one sees the hallmark of war, masses of rubble which were once factories, shops, and houses. Amid the universal devastation, the people, homeless and bewildered by their losses, face a bleak and uncertain future. Yet their spirit remains undaunted. Everywhere in Greece, rebuilding is going on. Here, earth is being turned into mortar for a mud brick house. Clay for roof tiles is needed at a Solomon workshop. In due course, it is processed into finished tiles for the homes of Greece. The wheelwright shop is a busy place. Horse-drawn carts are Greece's common carriers, and thousands of wheels are needed to replace the destruction of the war years. Over the Greek countryside, the olive trees, Athena's priceless gift to her beloved land, bear their fruit. Food for the Greek people, light for their homes and churches, and a valuable commodity for foreign trade. battered harbors of Greece are being cleared of the debris of war, and all along the shores, one sees the fishermen busily engaged in repairing their boats and mending their nets. The quays of Piraeus and Salonika resound once more to the vital commerce of the nation, as ships from many lands bring their cargoes of food and supplies to Greece. In their efforts to rebuild their devastated country, the Greek people are receiving the utmost assistance from America and from American institutions, such as the School of Classical Studies at Athens, which has, since 1881, sponsored scientific archaeological research in Greece. Part of the school is the Gennadian Library, with its outstanding collection of Byzantine books and manuscripts. Mrs. Stathatu and Shirley Weber, librarian of the Gennadian, look over some of the manuscripts donated by the former. A church service book of the 17th century A.D. Another Gennadion Fraser is a book of Turkish costumes, executed in tempera on parchment and dating from the 16th century A.D. The American school has at all times enjoyed the cooperation and assistance of the Greek Archaeological Society and representatives of the Greek government. The King and Queen of Greece show their interest by attending a public lecture at the school. In their functions, the archaeological schools of many nations are an integral part of contemporary life in Greece. At the ancient theater of Epidaurus, a large audience gathers to witness the French school's performance of Aeschylus' drama, The Persians. In Athens, at the Theater of Dionysus, on the southern slopes of the Acropolis, members of the American Aid Mission are given an indoctrination course in Greek antiquity by Oscar Broneer, acting director of the American School of Classical Studies. Modern Athens, like the ancient city, is dominated by the Acropolis, whose majestic temples, damaged though they have been by time and invasion, are still our most perfect examples of Greek architecture. Detailed study of the Acropolis has enabled scholars to construct a model of the hill as it looked in the days of St. Paul, a restoration based in large measure on the work of American school members. Immediately below the Acropolis and stretching for some 25 acres to the northwest lies the most extensive excavation of the American School of Classic Studies. Under the direction of the late T. Leslie Shear of Princeton, work was begun here in 1931, and 12 subsequent digging seasons have almost cleared the area. The Agora, or marketplace of ancient Athens. On the basis of the excavations to date, it has been possible to map the extent of the ancient Agora and the exact sites of its temples, covered porticos, and public buildings. Among the earliest remains in the area are tombs 34 centuries old. This model shows the grave vault and the burial vases. In addition to pottery, the tombs yielded bronze weapons, steatite buttons, and gold discs from the shrouds. One of the latest of Agora structures is this Byzantine church. Along the extreme western side of the square, and directly below the well-preserved temple of Hephaestus, the excavations revealed a great complex of public buildings, of which little remains except foundation walls. Homer Thompson, field director of the Agora excavations, and John Travalos, the architect, have spent years in studying the available evidence, clearing and measuring the foundations, and estimating from the surviving fragments of superstructure the height and proportions of the buildings. From the archaeological remains and from the testimony of historical records, it has been possible to determine accurately the form of all these civic structures as they were seen by Athenians of the 2nd century AD. An architectural drawing of the Stoa of Zeus, one of the west side buildings. A watercolor reproduction of a column from the Stoa, together with the elaborately decorated superstructure. Evidence for the colors used and their intensity is provided by fragments of architectural blocks found in the debris of the building. Many of them have retained the freshness of their original coloring. The west side buildings as they look today as they stood 20 or more centuries ago. The Stoa of Zeus, the Temple of Apollo, the Metroan with its state archives, the Bouleuterion or Council Hall, and the small Tholus, clubhouse for prominent Athenians. It was to this building that Socrates was summoned by the 30 tyrants. The excavation of any major site is a highly technical process, requiring skill, patience, and good judgment. Workmen must learn from months of experience when the pick can be used with safety and when it should give way to the pocket knife. Any single fragment has potential historical importance, and the utmost care is needed to guard against irreparable damage or loss. Traces of color must be treated immediately with a preservative to prevent fading with exposure to the weather. During the last excavation season, a group of houses of the Roman period was found, and on many of the walls, colored panels and decorative motifs were well preserved. In the same complex of houses, mosaic floors were uncovered. After careful brushing and the replacement of scattered tessera, their original design and coloration were clearly revealed. Monumental objects from the excavations present problems too. A crew of workmen and a crane were required to lift this colossal statue of the Emperor Hadrian and establish it on a permanent base. One of the sculptured details of the emperor's breastplate is of particular interest in its auspicious portrayal of the goddess Athena, standing as she does on the Wolf of Rome. Incidentally, Hadrian was the only excavation casualty of the war. Two of the small heads from his breastplate having been chipped off as souvenirs. Beyond the major excavation area, and below the Areopagus, is the site of the proposed Agora Museum, with construction scheduled for next summer. Objects to be housed in the new building include important pieces of sculpture, one of the finest being this archaic head of Heracles, whose workmanship is in the best 6th century BC tradition. A statue of victory from the gable of the Stoa of Zeus. Head of a girl from the Roman period. Of deep historical interest is a clepsydra, or water clock of classical date. This early timepiece was used to regulate speeches in the law courts, imposing a 6-minute limitation on public oratory. One could wish that this particular Athenian institution had survived into our own era. One of the 6,000 inscriptions found in the Agora excavation so far. It deals with the laws of the sanctuary of Eleusis and is noteworthy for its early form of writing, first left to right and then right to left. Ostraca of Aristides and Themistocles, typical of the hundreds uncovered in the dig. These fragments of common household pots, scratched with the names of famous Athenians, represent ballots cast for the exile of those whose growing power threatened the democratic tradition of the state. Vases of every description and period have been found. These graceful vessels date from the earliest chamber tombs. Pottery with geometric designs and crude figure representations coming from the graves of a later period. With succeeding ages, Athenian artists developed great skill in the delineation of elaborate scenes from history and mythology. Many of the vases of the classical period are fine examples of both the painter's art and the potter's technique. Cups with the traditional owls of Athens. In connection with the wealth of pottery uncovered in the Agora excavations, it is interesting to note that at Amarousi, on the outskirts of Athens, the red Attic clay is still being molded and fired in the potter's kiln. These humble bowls and jars of contemporary workmanship, coarse though they be in texture and design, are heirs of a long and splendid tradition. On the broad expanse of the Corinthian plateau above the Gulf of Corinth, the American school has been engaged for 50 years in exploring the remains of the ancient emporium, whose area extends up to the slopes of Aqua Corinth. Operations are conducted from a field house on the outskirts of the excavations. Today, as in antiquity, the Temple of Apollo is the heart of the ancient Corinthian settlement. Past it ran the main thoroughfare of the old city, the broad, marble-paved Lycian road, lined on both sides with shops and houses, and leading up to the civic center, or Agora proper, the square, as it looked in the 2nd century A.D. Leaving the Lycian road on the left, one passes through a complex of shop and house foundations to reach the central water supply system of ancient Corinth, the spring of Pyrene. From its underground sources, the winged horse Pegasus stopped to drink, and to its waters were ascribed virtues not found in ordinary springs. In even the smallest of Greek villages today, one finds that much of the life of the community revolved around a modern counterpart of ancient Pyrene, providing a source of water for household use, as well as a cool storage receptacle for water and wine jars. Other buildings uncovered at Corinth include the open-air theater of the Greek period and the sanctuary of Asclepius, the ancient god of healing. These were dining benches for the use of patients who lived in the hospital complex while they sought a cure for their ailments. the offertory box of the shrine. Its massive dimensions alone would discourage pilferage. Hundreds of terracotta reproductions of parts of the body, thank offerings of grateful patience, are testimonials to the successful curative power of the Asclepiad. Old Corinth is still a center of religious ritual. Each summer, the festival of Saints Peter and Paul brings thousands of devout pilgrims through the excavation area to the rostrum on which St. Paul stood to plead his case before the Roman governor Gallio. The bishops of Corinth, of Pactos and Gortyn conduct the ceremony on the ancient platform. Many of the most interesting objects found at Corinth have come from wells abandoned in antiquity and filled with the debris of neighboring houses and shops. Several such wells dug last season provided a great deal of information on the life and customs of the ancient Corinthians. After the digger and his buckets are brought to the surface, the work of sorting and evaluating the finds begins. The muddy fill must be carefully sifted for fragments of ancient vases, roof tiles, coins, and other remains. The objects are then put in a cleansing bath and scrubbed gently to remove the encrustations of the centuries. A well-preserved lion's head spout, such as was used to drain rainwater from the roofs of ancient buildings. The infinite number of potsherds found in any well present a special problem. The vases had been broken in antiquity and discarded for that reason. Their descent into the well completed the process of destruction. To restore them to their original shape is comparable to fitting together a jigsaw puzzle with parts missing. But experienced technicians develop an amazing skill in joining the minute sherds. After the majority of pieces have been found and glued together, the missing sections are restored in plaster. Finally, after hours of tedious labor, the workman proudly polishes the reconstructed vase. In this case, a fine example of a 6th century Corinthian cup. Another vase from the same fill, handsomely decorated and burnished. Every excavation object must be accurately catalogued for future study. Here, the director of the Corinth excavations checks over the articles which have been found and restored. This particular well had served an ancient tavern, and its vases are for the most part the common wine pitchers and cups of the period. Many of them were inscribed with toasts to love, to health, to wine, and to a cure for hangover. This one salutes the wine god Dionysus. A number of the primitive oil lamps of the time were found. To date, over 3,000 of these have been discovered at Corinth alone. Among the other diversions of an ancient Corinthian tavern were games of chance. From the same well came a marble gaming board and many sets of knucklebones for the contest. In Greek taverns today, one sees much the same kind of game being played. So the excavation workmen need no instruction in the use of their equipment. Refreshment is served in beakers used centuries ago by the tavern's clientele. To entertain his guests, the long-dead tavern owner had provided music rendered by Corinthian geisha girls. Numerous fragments of bone were found in the ancient fill. When joined, these were revealed as the flutes used by the musicians. Restoration has given us their size and shape, which, interestingly enough, differ little from the flutes of Greece today. On the outskirts of the Corinth excavations is a museum built in 1934 through the generosity of Mrs. Ada Small Moore of New York. This houses all the excavation material. The visitor entering from the museum courtyard comes first to the long sculpture gallery, in which is the bust of Herodes Atticus, famous benefactor of the ancient city. Its reverent inscription, "Herodes walked here," implies that Corinthians worship the ground on which he trod. Along the walls of the gallery stand monumental statues erected to commemorate other prominent men whose efforts had enlarged and beautified the city. Profiles from the same mold, an ancient philosopher and a modern one. Among the many statuettes is this replica of the Aphrodite of Corinth, a tiny terracotta cart and animals from a votive deposit. Horse and griffin mosaic. This Byzantine relief of a lion jumping for grapes was undoubtedly inspired from real life. A beautifully modeled lion's head spout from the Corinthian civic building. At Corinth, Athens, and many other sites, the excavations of the American School have uncovered material of deep historic and artistic significance, and in so doing, have added immeasurably to our knowledge of the life and times of ancient Greece. The importance of this archaeological work is not limited to the student of history and of the arts. Today, it means employment for hundreds of Greek workmen and a vital contribution to the rebuilding of a devastated land. Before the war, Greece's economy was in large measure dependent on revenue from travelers attracted by the beauty of the countryside and the monuments of an illustrious past. By increasing the tourist assets of Greece, the American School is helping to restore stability and well-being to this simple pastoral land. For Maria in distant Solomon. For seafaring Yargi on the docks of Piraeus. For Papa Demetrius in his Peloponnesian church. For hard-working Eleni in old Corinth. And for all the humble people of Greece, wherever they may be. The work of the school brings with it a renewed hope that they may live out their days in peace and contentment, secure in the heritage of their ageless land.